Hello there, my friends. I am Blackendrose, and welcome to this little podcast. I hope to do little podcasts like this going forwards, alongside other videos. I put a little notice up on my Twitter to ask about subjects for podcasts. One of the ones that came up from the wonderful streamer Larissa Rain. I'll be sure to leave a link in the description of this video to her Twitch, which I literally just got off from watching that stream as I do this. I got some motivation for this particular podcast. This podcast is going to be part of a little series, assuming I continue with this, regarding mental health. And obviously, as things stand at the moment, I've dated myself a little bit, with the COVID-19 situation going on and the lockdown just kind of easing off and the chaos in the world at the moment that's going on, anxiety levels are running high. So I figured this would be a good place to start. So it's going to be a nice, sort of chilled, relaxed sort of session. I've got some notes here that I've made myself to help prompt me in subjects to talk about regarding anxiety. So let's get started with this. Oh, and if it's not been realised at this point, this is not going to be a professional expose on how to cope with anxiety. There are going to be a lot of things that, based on my own personal experiences and the experiences I've learned from other people, but this isn't going to be this is how you beat anxiety. This is just a podcast on anxiety itself. If you find use from it, great, but bear in mind that what I state in this is not a be-all and end-all magic bullet to curing anxiety. So, just wait to get that out of the way now. So, anxiety. What is anxiety? Well, a lot of people wonder this, and the conclusion that I've come to regarding anxiety is like an intense fear. Like generally, whenever I have anxiety, it's an uncontrolled fear, usually rooted in something. And what makes it different from fear is that fear is generally a very spontaneous reaction to to either a thing or a circumstance. Anxiety is generally something a bit deeper than that. Usually fear is part of anxiety, but anxiety is not necessarily part of fear. Like, for example, I'm afraid of spiders. So if I saw a spider, I would be afraid of it. If I knew there was a spider in the room and I couldn't see it, that would give me anxiety. Because the thing that I'm afraid of isn't necessarily there, but anxiety can still set in because the thing that I'm afraid of is still in proximity. And I suppose that's one way to think about it. There's lots of different ways to think about anxiety though, so this is just the way I sort of come to it, is that it's a kind of fear, and that sort of leads on to the next one of how it feels. Well, it feels like being afraid, but it's a different kind of afraid. It's like, if I was to take like emotional strain as a result from anxiety, like I have like some social anxiety, so that anxiety is rooted purely in dealing with strangers and dealing with people face to face. So when I am coming upon a situation where I'm going to have to do that, I get anxious. Anxiety tends to be on the lead up to something, and whilst you can have anxiety during a situation, more often than not, anxiety comes on the lead up to a problem, on the lead up to an event, or on the lead up to a situation that you know is coming. It is generally just an irrational fear. Now, irrational doesn't mean it's not explainable. Irrational just means that it's not rational. Like, you can generally end up making mountains out of molehills, or it can feel like a much bigger problem than it really actually is. Again, like me and social anxiety. For me, it's like well, what will happen if the person turns aggressive? What if I upset someone? And it's like the constant what ifs going through your head, like trying to over analyze, over plan, to ensure that you're in control of the situation. Anxiety can come from a loss of control of a situation. Well, it certainly does with me anyway. I'm sort of talking in circles at the moment, but believe me, it does come back around. Anxiety is irrational, and that can mean that trying to work your way through it can be quite tricky, because it's trying to bring rationality to something that's irrational, and that can be quite difficult to do. So, I've got down here relation to fear. Fear and anxiety are very similar, because anxiety is a kind of fear. It's heavily attached to it. It can be attached to like events that have happened in the past, or perhaps even things that have not happened to you but you've seen a lot. Like, there's a couple of people I know who have something called mean world syndrome. What that means is, I think a syndrome might be disorder, but what it is that generally, if you spent a lot of time like watching the news, and the news is generally doom and gloom, and you sort of get this impression that the world is a horrible, mean place. And what that can mean is that you become you get anxiety from the idea of going out into the world or dealing with people in the world, because your only exposure to it has been very negative, very fearful, and very aggressive. And that's where the relation to fear comes in. Now, again, taking my personal experiences where it comes to social anxiety, I hate the idea of upsetting people. So, and I also have had really bad experiences dealing with aggressive people, because they've been very intimidating and overbearing and even forceful. So what can happen is that I get very afraid of like the possibility of angering people, because I don't want to deal with the backlash of that. But also I get afraid of upsetting people, because I really hate upsetting people. It makes me feel bad for making someone else feel bad. So it's kind of like this mixed bag of constantly thinking, I don't want to do this, I don't want it to come to this, I don't want it to come to this. And it's not necessarily rational, but it's the fear that it could happen, or it's the fear that it's going to happen, or in many cases, it's the fear of, this is a situation where one of my fears could happen. Anxiety is the lead up to a fear. To put it bluntly, you can have a fear of social situations, but the social anxiety is the lead up to the fear itself. And this is where a very important point comes about anxiety. Much like depression, anxiety is reactionary. Anxiety itself is not something that you can have on its own. And what I mean by that is that something has to cause it. There has to be a cause of anxiety. It's like, if you pain itself cannot exist unless there is something that is causing it. Anger itself often cannot exist unless there is a cause of it. And this is the important thing. I'm generalised, obviously. There's a few specific circumstances that differ. And the important thing about that is, you can't have anxiety without something causing the anxiety. And this is where the fear element comes in, is that anxiety is generally caused by a fear. And fear can be trauma, which in my case it is in a few cases, or in a few situations. But the idea is that anxiety is reactionary. So, and this leads on to my next point of how it develops. The idea behind anxiety is that it's purely reactionary to a circumstance, be it a loss of control of a situation, or be it related to a past event that you're afraid of, or perhaps a trauma that's happened in your past. There's a massive spectrum of things I'm not going to go into, but there's a massive spectrum of things it can be. Now, how does it develop? Well, generally something will happen, be it a negative event, or you have heard about an event that is going to be happening to you. It's like a good example of this is going to the dentist. Have you ever had those scenarios where you see like TV shows or media, or that really irritating friend who likes to tease you, basically going, yeah, they rip your teeth out, they tie string to your teeth and just like close a door and it rips your teeth out and it hurts really bad. Like, if you've never experienced going to the dentist, that's your only comprehension of what it is. So then you become afraid, that becomes a fear of going to the dentist, and the anxiety comes from thinking about that fear, approaching that fear, the anxiety leading up to it. Another great example is interviews. Interviews are really big for anxiety because we desperately want that job. So we get afraid of rejection. We get afraid of failure because it means the outcome that we want doesn't happen. So we get anxious. We want to make sure that we're perfect. And we get anxious of the failure. That's the anxiety. Now, I want to stress something here. Being anxious and anxiety are two different things. Being anxious is the action of anxiety, but an anxiety is a specific thing. Like, it's like a social anxiety, a traumatic anxiety. Like, anxiety itself is effectively the label of the feeling, whereas being anxious is the actual action of the feeling. Now, you can get anxious without having an anxiety or having the label anxiety, because that's a natural reaction to fear. Anxiety itself, and I really should have said this at the start, anxiety itself is actually where it doesn't stop, like, and it can occur at any time randomly, like in flashes, like anxiety attacks. Anxiety is intense feelings of, well, anxiety. That's basically that. I'm sort of talking in circles again. So, addressing anxiety, and I've put down reaction to something. Now, how does one address anxiety? Well, it's the same way we address fear. We have to confront it. And this is something I've had to do myself. I had to go to therapy twice to come anywhere close to confronting my anxiety. And it's not social anxiety, that's just a part of it. My anxiety springs from a self-pressure. And I've had to confront that because that has come from a lifelong period of low-level bullying, which hasn't happened at home, but it's happened in the places where I've been in school and in the job that I had, which happened to be the school that I was at, so that's curious. Now, when anxiety hits, it can hit you like a freaking freight train. It can spawn from nowhere, and it hits hard. Like, when I've had anxiety attacks, like, I can just be going through my day, and then, like, I'll see something, I'll hear something, or something will spring to mind, and before I know it, like, anxiety is setting. I've developed all kinds of techniques to try and mitigate that, but the techniques are reactionary. So what happens is that the anxiety kicks in so quickly, like that. I don't know if you heard that, me clicking my fingers. The anxiety can kick in so quickly that by the time you realise you're having an anxiety attack, you're already having the anxiety attack. So you're already in a fight or flight response, and thus you're thinking irrationally, and it becomes really hard to sort of bring that back down. And these can happen randomly, right? Depending on the severity of your condition. Right? It can happen just to a sound, a smell, any of the senses can set it off, and even just a random thought process, like where you just have one of those times where you just randomly think of the thing that is attached to the anxiety, and then suddenly you'll have an anxiety episode. and they really can come from nowhere. That's so damaging when it does happen, because you have to try and calm yourself down again to reach the point where you can actually start addressing the situation. And this is where it comes into confronting and addressing the anxiety. You can't address anxiety when you're anxious. Like, you can't address it when you're having an anxiety episode. So if someone is telling you, like, you need to face this when you're having an anxiety episode, that's the wrong advice. I'm telling you that now. The first thing you have to do if you're having an anxiety episode is to ground yourself, to bring yourself back to the here and now, and to sort of calm yourself down first. Now, there are techniques to doing this. One of the techniques I learned is to look around you, use your senses, like touch, not necessarily taste, but like touch, smell, hearing, sight. Look what's around you, hear what's around you, touch what's around you if it's appropriate, smell what's around you, again, if it's appropriate. Take all of that in and focus on that, especially sight and hearing. Right? For example, right now I'm sitting in my room. I can see the colour of the walls. I can see the posters. I can see my PlayStation 4. I can see my PC. I can see my notes on screen. When you start doing that, you focus your mind on the here and now, the present. Then you stop thinking either forwards or backwards, and you bring yourself back to the here and now, and that helps ground you a bit. That's a starting point. Having things that can help calm you, such as music, is a really good one. Right. One of the things I actually did was I set up a mix on my phone, which consists of soundtracks that bring me comfort or remind me of happier times. If I start having an anxiety episode, I just plug into my phone with my earphones and play that, and that helps bring the comforting feelings back, the comforting thoughts back, and that can be enough to give me back control over the anxiety. And this is the big thing. Anxiety generally comes from loss of control of a situation or of your feelings. If you can wrangle that control back, then the anxiety will still be there, but you'll be able to take control of the situation again and get yourself in a situation where you can be calm again, like a safe place, be it your room, your home, your car, whatever it is. Having a place that you can consider a place of safety is very important, or a happy place. Now, that's not always easy for people, depending on the situation, but a happy place can be a mental state of being as well, where you can just find comfort where you are, and this can be helped with music, games, movies, things like that. When you're not in a state of anxiety attack or panic attack, confronting anxiety, and you're not going to like this, confronting anxiety is confronting the cause of the anxiety, the fear, or the trauma. There's no way around that. If you want to beat anxiety, you have to confront the source of it. You can do this yourself, depending on the circumstances, or you can seek professional help. I sought professional help, that helped me. It doesn't help everybody, but I would heavily advise it as a possibility. Now, another important element to confronting anxiety is social network. And I don't necessarily mean social media in that. A social network refers to people that you can trust. Friends, family, as the case may be. People who you can speak to about this. Now, you need to be very sure on this, because not everybody is geared to deal with another person's burden. And this is a very important point. You can't thrust your anxiety upon someone else. That's not fair. But you can Speak to your friends, your family, or whoever you feel comfortable speaking to. Heck, speak to me if you want to. Speak to those people and share with them your feelings. If you feel capable, don't force yourself to it. But two, if you feel like you can trust them with that, go for it. If not, there are numerous websites you can go to. There are phone numbers you can call. A quick Google search will reveal a multitude of professional places you can go to just to chat, just to talk. It's not necessarily therapy, but there are there are people you can call, websites you can go to seek someone to speak to. Right, the help is out there. Just reach out and find it. Now, I say reach out and find it. I'm not saying this is easy. It is difficult. Because in order to do this, you have to build up the confidence and the courage within yourself to face the very thing that is causing the anxiety. In order to do that, it's about confronting fear. And confronting fear is not easy. Believe me, it's taken me 3 years to do this. Right. When I had my initial breakdown, which was about 3 to 4 years ago, it's taken me like that long to reach this state to be able to try and confront this again. Depending on the intensity of the anxiety, it can be very hard to deal with that. And I'm not gonna say you should just do it, because that's not fair. What I will say is that if you are confronting anxiety, that is respectable. That is worthy of praise, because it is a very difficult thing to do. You have to admit to yourself there's a problem, and then you have to face that. And it can be a long process. It can take weeks, months, years to even get to a point where you can be ready to face it. What does it mean to face a fear? Controlled exposure is generally the method that I'm most aware of. What that means is that you have to face the scenario that is causing the fear. Now, in one of my cases, it's being around groups of people. If I want to beat that fear, I have to be around groups of people. I have to have controlled exposure to the scenario that is creating the fear for me, to build up the experiences and memories to show me that it's not something to be afraid of anymore. It's like the fear of water, or like swimming, drowning. Best way to confront that is at a swimming pool, preferably one that you can stand knee deep in. I'm sorry, it's over the little chuckle there, but the idea is that controlled exposure to the thing you're afraid of, and when I say controlled, it's not forced. You do it at a gradual pace. Right, and you may do this with professional, with friends, family, or by yourself, whichever one works best for you. But as you do this, you become more used to the scenario, and as you become used to it, you start to realize that it's not the situation that you're afraid of. It was the event that happened that made you fearful, and because that event is not repeating in this same situation, you gradually stop fearing that situation. So again, if you're afraid of swimming, if you're afraid of drowning, then being in a pool and not drowning is basically coding your brain to think, well, actually, I'm in this pool and I'm not drowning, so maybe I don't need to be afraid of water anymore because I'm not drowning in it. Now, it's okay to have fears. It's okay to have fears. I'm going to say that now. The important thing is to try not to let fears, sorry about that. The important thing is to try not to let fears control you. And this leads on nicely to the next point that I have. Can it be beaten? Yes. Anxiety can be beaten. because it is possible to control your fears and to even unlearn fears. And since anxiety is purely a reactionary response to something, to a fear, and it's possible to unlearn fears, it's possible to unlearn anxieties. Is it easy? No. Is it possible? Yes. 100% possible. It just depends on a few simple factors, which is one, how committed you are to confronting the fear, the tools and support that you have to help you get through that, and if you're committed to it for the long term. One of the things that I often see is people leap in, and because they're not getting results within the first month, they give up. Or because it's hard, they give up. So I'm going to tell you again, this is not easy. It is not easy to confront anxiety. It is not easy to beat it. But it can be done if you stick with it. And you will be very proud of yourself when you finally control it. Now, my last note here is closing statement. My closing statement for this is: anxiety is a fear response it's a form of fear response related to a specific fear. Anxiety itself cannot exist without that fear. So if the fear is gone, anxiety can no longer function. Anxiety is not the same as feeling anxious, but it does share the same feeling responses. Anxiety can develop as a result of fears, be it traumas or worries. It can be addressed, but it is not easy. But if you stay strong and stay the course, you can beat anxiety. Now, I realise that this sort of rambled around in circles a little bit. I apologise for that. It's not easy exploring this particular emotion, because anxiety does tend to go all over the place. But if you want to talk about anxiety, hit me a message on the YouTube, on the Twitter. Hit me up and let's start a dialogue. I hope to do more of these podcasts going forwards. There'll be more, hopefully, in the mental health side of things. And as I leave now, I give a shout out again to Larissa Rain, who prompted this particular podcast as a suggestion for mental health. Thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you just thank you in general. If you need to discuss any of this, feel free to in the comments or drop me a message on Twitter. Take care of yourself, guys, and remember, no matter how bad anxiety can feel, as long as you're courageous, as long as you're strong, as long as you be yourself, be awesome, you can confront anxiety, you can tame it, you can defeat it. Just stay strong. Take care of yourself. Bye bye.